Welcome to Look for Light, a podcast where we dive into the world of The Last of Us. I'm your host, Stuart Traynor, and I'm joined, as always, by the bottle to my brick. It's Jess Sterling. Jess, how are you doing?
Okay, I love this because I am a bottle girly.
Really? Technically, mechanically, they're worse, but I always do prefer them because I feel like they're louder, even though apparently they're not.
I think it's a vibes thing. I just gravitate towards the bottles. Even when you find them in places you wouldn't expect them to be, the world has a limitless supply of bottles, is what we've learned playing The Last of Us.
Yeah. I kind of do question how much Naughty Dog think that the American kind of general population are drinking and just tossing bottles, like not even smashing them, just leaving them around just in case that someone should ever need them in an apocalyptic world, I guess.
Yeah, a lot
Odd
of bricks
choice.
around too. No siding, but bricks everywhere.
Yeah. Anyway, for those joining us here for the first time, welcome to Look for the Light. I can't believe we're finally doing this. This has been something that we've been talking about doing for the longest time. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You can subscribe to us at Look for the Light. We're available on all podcatchers. Follow us on social media at Look for the Light Pod. And you can also catch us on YouTube, where our lovely faces are available for display at Look for the Light Pod there. Before we dive in, though, we want to take a moment to talk about spoilers because it's a big deal. Spoilers. Both Jess and I have played the games and we've watched the show before. So we're coming in this with a lot of knowledge about the story and its characters. But that said, we won't be approaching the podcast with spoilers at the forefront. We're going to approach it episode by episode and we're going to focus on what happens with each installment without spoiling what's coming ahead. But for those of you who do want to talk spoilers, at the end of this episode, we'll have a spoiler section that will cover the spoilers from the TV show and the game. And that's where we'll dive into like the heavy stuff that's coming up. But for those of you who are kind of a bit spoiler averse, don't worry. We'll flag it. It'll be fine. It's all good.
I think we need to set up what we know, what we like our history with the show, with the game, all of that.
So we do. Let's dive into that then. So Jess, what was your first experience with the game?
I did not play the game until the show was being made. So I actually have a really interesting experience. If you are coming to us from the post-show recaps days, first of all, hi, hello. Second of all, you may already know that I have played both games. I played game 1 while watching the show. I would watch the episode and then I would play that portion of the video game and I podcasted about it over on post show recaps. So that was my first experience. So not a ton of history here, only a few years. Since then, I've also played game 2. I played it on Twitch, which is super helpful for myself because anyone that knows me knows I have a terrible memory. So I can just watch myself play it and remember how I felt at the time. But yeah, I don't have a super long history with the show. That being said, I absolutely adore it. I love everything about the show and game. Stuart, unlike you have much more history, the show and the game.
You say that, but it's not a long history. So I've played the games a lot, but I'm a latecomer to the games. So originally they were released on the PS3. I've never had a PlayStation. I had to steal my brother's PlayStation 4 to be able to play this game, and it is still sat underneath my TV behind me right now because I refuse to give it back. But when I did play it, I binged through it, fell in love immediately, played through the second game as well, and was emotionally destroyed, and then went back in for seconds. I knew I loved this franchise, this world immediately because I'm a real glutton for the grimdark, really. Like anything that can make you emotional, make you really kind of like proper have a thought about your life and kind of go a little bit tunnel vision of just, oh gosh, how bleak is everything. That's my jam. I love it. And so I kind of fell in hard, watched everything that I could consume on it. Been a fan of obviously Critical Role and D&D space, so there's that kind of like crossover with many of the voice actors that are on Critical Role being voice actors in this game. Most notably, Ashley Johnson, who's the voice actress for our beloved Ellie. So it's always been this pervasive thing around all the media that I kind of consume. So yeah, when they decided to do a TV show, oh, was I relieved because at first they were talking about doing a film. How can you cram this into a film? It just
You
wouldn't
really
work.
can't. No.
Yeah, there's too much. And even then, like, we only get a handful of episodes in this season. And I wish we could kind of stretch it out and have more because I just want to. Weirdly, it's a horrible world, but I want to live in it. It's terrible.
Yeah, the world sucks. But the characters, right? I think that's what keeps people
Hmm.
coming back is the relationships and the characters. And that's what drew me in immediately to the story. Wasn't I mean, I'll be honest and say like I'm not the biggest like shooter game person. I have terrible aim. And so I was in it more for the story, and that's what I think hooked a lot of people, and the complexities of it and just the grittiness of it. Yeah, it's incredible, and I'm really, really excited not just to jump into season 1 and, like, re-experience all of that, but then for the upcoming season 2 that we're getting very soon, just a couple months away.
Exactly. So this is the prime time to really listen along for a rewatch, refresh yourself on everything that's happening, and then we can jump straight into season 2 and be fully up to date with everything. So with that in mind, let's jump into it.
There are no treatments for this, no preventatives, no cures. They don't exist. It's not even possible to make them.
So if that happens,
We lose.
We open with this cold open of a chat show where John Hannah from The Mummy is not this lovable buffoon, but a very intense scientist who is talking about the upcoming pandemic, epidemic, like of what to expect, and it is bleak to say the least, right?
It's horrifying, especially knowing that it's going to happen, right? This talk show is in 1968. We know what he's saying does happen, and it's so ominous, the fact that it's going to be a fungal infection, and it's going to be as a result of the world getting warmer, which as someone who lives in this world that we're in and global warming is like a true and real crisis, I think it kind of it's not just this like, oh, a thought experiment out in the
Mhm.
universe. It's like, no, the reality is the world is getting warmer. And so to have this kind of lingering threat of fungus that can basically just take over your body is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, it's a really refreshing departure from the game there because the game doesn't really explain this. Like it explains the cordyceps, like fungus, and I think there's been the Planet Earth documentary that talks about cordyceps and how horrifying it is, where this like fungus burrows into an ant's mind, fills it with hallucinogens, and then just kind of reanimates its corpse to spread it further. It's the stuff of nightmares, but it's not fully explained in the game. So to do this and contextualize it for viewers, I thought was really smart to also frame it in a way in which it kind of relates to us and the threats of what's happening. But it also then explains why the fungus can transfer to mammals. Because as kind of explained in the bits, if it works on insects, well, that's because they have a core body temperature that's much, much lower than ours. So there's no real reason for them to go into mammals because that's what they've kind of evolved to do. But if the world were to get hotter and it has to adapt to survive that, then what's the jump? Now, admittedly, it is a bit of a stretch. Mammal core body temperatures are much, much higher than probably insects. And so it is this kind of leap of faith. But I mean, we're dealing with science fiction here, right? So to ground it in that way, I think that works really well.
Yeah, it has to be just believable enough, which I think
Yeah.
it is. And this is part of what I love about the show. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about adaptations generally speaking, but something that I think the reason why I think this show is a successful adaptation, obviously there's a zillion reasons, the incredible cast being one of them. But I also think it's the world building. It's the fact that what may work in a video game doesn't necessarily always translate super well to the screen. And so I think setting the stage and kind of setting our expectations and building out this larger world to then focus very tightly in on a couple of characters from that world is a really intelligent way to pull in viewers that maybe haven't played the game and are just popping on HBO to see what's new. It's a great way to kind of level set everyone's expectations of what we're actually talking about here and making it a global thing rather
Yeah.
than immediately pulling into just a few specific characters.
Yeah, because I guess that's the problem, is that it can feel too insular, isn't it? If it only focuses on how this affects the Joel and the Ellie of it, or like if it's too focused on them, then you don't really get the kind of wider thoughts of just, well, how is this impacting the world itself? And that's the thing with the world building, is just like it's incredibly expansive, but also detailed in a way, because I like the fact they get into this kind of crunchy science of it all. And also the way in which they set up this scene, I think plays really well, because obviously it's TV audiences are very different from video game audiences. Video game audiences are in, like, you've purchased a rather expensive game or downloaded it, or like kind of you're gonna experience it. Whereas TV, you can flip the channel, you can change what's, if you're not kind of vibing with it. So to set that expectation of a short scene that then jumps into another scene that's set in a different time shows that maybe you shouldn't get too comfortable with what's coming up, which I think works brilliantly for what follows.
Where's the pancake mix?
Oh, was that? Yeah, it was. Sorry.
I was gonna make you birthday pancakes. I swear.
You know, I don't really like pancakes.
I know you don't like them. It's for my benefit.
So we jump back in. It's September 26th, 2003. We're already starting with a massive change from the game. The game was 2013. What did you think about this change, Jess?
I remember when I originally watched the show, I was like, why you gotta do this to us, man? Like, you gotta put, you gotta set it in, like, because at the time, and still, sort of, we were in this like pandemic era of our lives already. Other than that, though, in terms of the actual just COVID PTSD side of me, I didn't mind the change. I feel like it makes sense to then, because we know we're going to be jumping 20 years into the future, to have that be our kind of like modern time felt fine to me. I don't see it as
Mhm.
like this massive departure to get upset about, you know? What about you?
No, I thought it was a good explainer. I think that in the way, because in 2013 mobile phones had become more prevalent, so it's easier for information to spread, whereas taking it back to 2003, yeah, they were available, but information didn't spread as quickly as it did. So the whole idea of this happening around Sarah and Joel and them not really noticing it, I thought worked really kind of creepily, because there's
Yes.
so much could have happened back then that you wouldn't really have caught wind of unless you watched the evening news, unless you kind of picked up a paper the next day. Like, it ages us terribly. And I
Yeah.
will say, wasn't great to dive back into a world where George W. Bush was president, I will just say.
Yeah.
But it
It's
works.
it does so many things correctly, and it does set us up for think about it this way. Any video game player is going to have Easter eggs to
Mhm.
try to like catch, right? Oh, there's sirens in the background, Sarah getting rushed out of the watch store, like because they saw something on the news. There's like little mentions on the news on the TV that you can hear in the background, right? Like, those are Easter eggs for video game players and eagle-eyed TV only watchers. It's tense. And they put you immediately into this feeling where you like, oh, something's going wrong. I know something's going to go wrong. Like, you can feel it. You can feel it happening without it being as overt as like, someone's just scrolling on Twitter, on social media, like, oh man, what is happening? Like the rise in infection. I think it's a better way to kind of pace that tension out over a little bit longer of a period of time.
Yeah. And I love the fact that we get the opening scene of like obviously them just waking up for breakfast, like a really typical normal day, and this horror just slowly seeping in over the course of the day. Like you said, it's kind of full on horror of just, oh gosh, that's horrible to know that it's there and we see it, but they don't because they're too consumed with their lives. They've got a lot going on. It's John's birthday, for crying out loud. Ah, this is
Mhm.
the worst day to have a birthday.
Yeah, and he's turning 36, which as someone also in my 30s, I immediately was like, "How is he 36 and he has a teenage daughter?" Like, just
Yeah,
not me
I
hyperventilating, like
yeah, I freaked out completely. I was like, "Oh gosh." I was like,
I'm too
if I
young
was
for
in
this.
that I can barely think of how I would survive in the post-apocalyptic world, let alone this world that I'm watching them
Mhm.
right now. I'm like, "How's he got a job, daughters to say, no, no, don't wanna deal with that at all."
Yeah. And we're not
Oh,
dealing with a ton of exposition here, right? Like we know enough. We know, okay, this is Joel. He has a daughter named Sarah. He has a brother named Tommy. He seems to work in construction, right? Like all of those, he seems to be working a lot, like a lot of hours,
mhm,
especially on his birthday. He's going to be home late. And something I really love about the pilot that is a little bit an expanse, I would say, on the video game is the question of how this outbreak occurred, like how the
yeah,
infection reached so many people so quickly. I love this because, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Stuart, but I don't believe that this was from the video game at all. This was an addition for the television show, which again, I think sets like it just builds out this world around us that it's like maybe it was in some sort of flour because we're
mm,
getting hints of, oh, Joel forgot pancake mix and he forgot to pick up his own birthday cake and they reject the biscuits from the next door neighbor.
yeah.
Right? It all feels like, okay, so it's coming from a specific source.
Mhm. And that's again this touch of detail of like you can tell that the makers of the show absolutely love it. Like Craig Mason, who headed up this episode, originally wasn't gonna be Craig Mason, but jumped into it anyway. You can tell huge fan of the game because to throw those things in is just a level of detail that isn't necessary. It's not the kind of thing that's going to make or break the show, but it's just that subtle nods to the people that have kind of paid attention of just like, oh, that's what they're doing there. And forums went wild when this kind of came about. I think Reddit was kind of like every other like kind of hour there was a new post going, I've got a theory. And everyone's like, yeah, we've had it. Everyone's thinking the same thing, but join us because we're all thinking it. It was really good touch.
Yeah,
What did you think about the whole Sarah of it all, though? What with the
yeah.
first off, how she got the money, like that was finally answered. It wasn't in the video game. Turns out she just stole it. But also her weird kind of curiosity about the knife, because I think there's a great way in which they kind of throw that in to show a bit of contrast with Ellie.
Yeah, Sarah's such an interesting character. She's almost she's almost the antithesis of Ellie. Like she's almost the other side of the coin of
Hmm.
who Ellie ends up being, and they're raised in two completely different worlds. Um I remember playing game 1 for the first time and you're in the role of Sarah. And I, not knowing a ton about the game, not really thinking too deeply about it, I assumed I was going to be playing as Sarah for, like,
Hmm.
a good amount of time. Like, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think anything, like, would happen ends up happening. Uh, yeah, Sarah seems she's strong, she's resilient. I think she has that in common with Ellie. Very independent, right? Self-sufficient. She's making breakfast for them. She made the
Yeah.
eggs. Maybe she got a couple shells in them. Forgivable mistake. But Sarah needs her father, right? She needs the support. And I think Ellie is someone who is much more accustomed to being on her own, being self sufficient, not really having someone to rely on. So I think inherently they're going to be two very, very different characters who both end up with Joel in his care.
Yeah, yeah. I like the way in which Sarah is portrayed as being like a child that with needs of like needing a parental figure, but also being completely sufficient in terms of making up for the failings that Joel brings to his life. And that's not to say that Joel's a buffoon or anything. It's just that he takes on too much. I think like he's clearly overworked, and she's like making up the shortfall. I think they excuse it away by having the birthday, which maybe accounts for a few of the things of like why she may be making breakfast that morning, and maybe it's not necessarily a regular thing, but just by the fact that they've like Tommy's just coming around and he's raiding their fridge for like leftovers and things like that, like you get the sense that this is normalcy for them all, and that there is this kind of like we'll just make it work dynamic between the three of them, and that they all kind of like pick things that they can jump into to kind of like fill the gaps where the others are lacking. And Joel being forgetful, maybe messing things up, whether he is self-destructive in a way, whether it's through clumsiness, forgetfulness, or whether it's just, I don't know, maybe he doesn't feel like he deserves it. I think that is slowly seeped into this, and it's to give you this kind of impression of just, well, not everything's going to go Joel's way in this world, which
Mhm.
is kind of incredibly sad, but also a great way to set it up.
Yeah, I also especially love, like you said, with Tommy just kind of walking in like he owns the place, right? It automatically establishes an intimacy of
Hmm.
not just between the brothers, but between all three of them. And
Yeah.
so then looking to a little bit later in the episode when, okay, well, we know he's already lost Sarah 20 years ago, and now he hasn't heard from Tommy. His last remaining lifeline to the pre-outbreak world, I think it hits harder knowing how close they were, knowing it wasn't just a matter of like, "Oh, yeah, they worked together and maybe that was it." No. It seems like Tommy maybe doesn't live with them, but he is so comfortable there that he is like, "Oh, you didn't make me any eggs?" And he's, like, looking through their fridge, right? Like, it's that intimacy that I
Hmm.
feel like makes anything bad happening to these characters cut that much deeper.
Yeah. And it certainly cuts deeper.
Yes, sir. We're not sick. Sir, we are not sick!
So the infection seemingly escalates overnight. Joel gets back later than anticipated. They sit down, they catch a DVD. Oh, like obviously hand over the present, which is the key thing as well. The watch, which is gonna become quite important and is referenced later on in the episode. That was a sweet moment, wasn't it? When they kind of just sat on the couch. It was just kind of like adorable between the two of them.
I love it, and I especially love whenever they will pull cutscenes pretty much verbatim from the game and include them in the
Hmm.
show. I think it's both like, "Oh, yes, a successful adaptation," but also it gives the actors a chance, in my opinion, to really kind of hone in on those characters, and it is so sweet. Like, you could tell how close they are, right? Because it's not just she's handing him a birthday gift out of, obligation or anything like that, like sometimes can happen with children and their
Hmm.
parents. No, she thought about this. She saw his watch was broken. She got it fixed for him. Yeah, maybe she used his money to pay for it, but like she says, he was never gonna take the time to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's very thoughtful, it's incredibly meaningful, and I love that they just wanna watch bad movies together. Like, that's so fun. It's great, and even though what is it, 9, 10 o'clock at night? Like, that's pretty late to be starting a movie. My god, couldn't be me. But I love this moment because it encapsulates their relationship, and I love it so much.
Yeah. But sadly, Joel gets a call, is taken out. Tommy has got himself in jail. The fool of the years, although saying that, seemingly quite virtuous. Sticking up for a waitress that was swung at by a patron. Goes in, lamps the guy, gets carted over to jail. But I love the fact that Tommy says, it wasn't my fault this time, which again sets up this kind of history that's behind the scenes of just, okay, well, Tommy is the one that is letting Joel down, and Joel's the one that's always going to bail him out. Bailing
Typical
out
older brother
is,
stuff, right?
yeah, it's just totally typical. I've done it so many times for my brother, just bailing him out. But I love the fact that like they really live up to the whole phrase of like bailing someone out. Like he literally bailed him out, and it establishes their dynamic completely of just, okay, well, Joel's the not only the provider and protector, but he's also kind of like, well, I've now got to like father him in a way of like, I've got to be that guy. Um, Goes to pick up Tommy, and while he's gone, Sarah discovers that, well, things are pretty bad as jets are flying overhead.
This is horrifying. And, you know, understandably, she's like checking in on the neighbors, right? Like that's her first instinct is my dad's not home. Maybe I should go. Cause they're close enough, right? Like
Yeah.
she's baked cookies with them. They're familiar with the Adlers. And so she's going to go check in on them. And I love the inclusion of dogs in this. And obviously, I'm a dog person. Okay. So obviously, I'm going to be excited to see a dog. But the other reason I love the inclusion of dogs in this is because I love when any sort of zombie infection sort of storyline involves animals that are able to sense that something is
Hmm.
going wrong. Because dogs, first of all, incredibly intelligent, but also their sense of smell is way better than ours. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, if bomb sniffing dogs exist, why can't cordyceps sniffing dogs exist, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it makes total sense. And so just the ominousness of you having this dog that it's like, oh, did he just get out? Let me bring him back. That is so terrified of what's going on in that house that it would rather run away. That's like, I feel like you're already setting up this tension and this like just fear, through the eyes of an animal. I love it so much.
Yeah. Sadly, though, Sarah doesn't really heed the warning and does the horror trope of just, well, I'm going to go towards the creepy thing.
Yep.
Not the smartest thing in the world. And it's probably the worst thing I'm going to say about Sarah in this whole thing, because if it were me, I would be going nowhere near. Or I would at least be kind of like, peering through the windows, having a look from like distance, maybe. I wouldn't be walking in, stepping in blood, and then going, oh, now it's gone bad. But to
Maybe
find,
I can forgive her because in her mind, "Oh my god, their dog escaped. I better go tell
yeah,
them." But maybe that's not what she's thinking because
yeah.
there's also jets and stuff.
Yeah. But if I found, as I went into a kitchen, the clearly kind of like old grandmother who was wheelchair bound suddenly up and feasting on, was it her daughter that she must have been? Cause, yeah, because the
Yes.
yeah, he was by the kind of door, so chowing down and then pulling up and finding these tendrils of mycelium grib. I'd be out of bed like a flash.
The tendrils are a moment, okay?
Mhm.
Like, we need to hold space for the tendrils. They are wild. This is also another, like, show edition, right? We didn't get a ton of this, like, tendrils out the mouth sort of thing in the video game.
No.
And I love it because it's so much creepier. Like when you imagine just kind of these fingers, these tendrils outstretching to just cover the most ground to reach out and send almost like if you're a D&D fan, like a tremor sense sort of thing.
Mhm.
It's that much more horrifying and disturbing. And it is such a visceral image that knowing HBO has like this massive budget for this sort of thing, it's like, of course, why wouldn't you, right? If you're Craig Mason and they're like, hey, we have the budget, you're like, give them some tendrils in their mouth. It'll be disgusting. It's perfect.
It's it's a really practical choice as well, because obviously in the video game there are spores. Spores are the way in which it's kind of like primarily spread. Once it's kind of baked into the world, we don't really get a view of spores at this point, but we get some exposure of the tendrils at this point, because I think tendrils work more like it's easier to explain how it's spread, but how people can traverse through areas where there are tendrils, but there aren't spores. Because if there were spores, they'd be everywhere. But eventually they would dissipate, surely. And so I think it comes from a practicality of kind of when you can't have spores everywhere. Are gas masks going to be really that prevalent? Do we really want to have the imagery of covering people's faces for a filming kind of practicality? Also, do we want to have the imagery of masks, considering, yeah, like it's loaded,
Just the
but
word mask just feels
yeah,
just a visceral reaction to that. Yeah, I think you're right. Practically speaking, it makes more sense as well. And I mean, I like it. Again, I think these sort of these changes from game to screen in an adaptation, you have to like be okay with them changing some things, especially when it's like this, and it makes a ton of sense to do it this way.
yeah. I feel like it's a thoughtful change. It's not change for the sake of it, which it's always something that I'm kind of on guard with, because I was incredibly hopeful when they did the adaptation that it would be faithful. The moment that things were playing out the way they were, in terms of once we got past the kind of the cold open and we got into Joel and Sarah of it all, I was like, oh, this is what I imagined from this. This is kind of their lives a little bit expanded, and we're seeing everything play out in the order in which I would expect it to be played out. Fantastic. Pump it into my veins. This is brilliant. So when a change comes along, I'm like, well, if they're being faithful to such a degree in those areas, any changes must be necessary in a way.
Yeah. Nearly 100% faithful to the video game.
We are 30 minutes into this, and you've already made a Traitors reference. Fantastic. I love it.
Yes, but luckily Sarah doesn't, that is not where Sarah will die this episode. She is fated to die a little bit later. Some of the changes though, again, we talk about this like being a faithful adaptation. I love the way they toy with us in doing so, right? In this whole moment, because you're okay, Sarah, Tommy, Joel all pile into Tommy's truck. They're driving, they're seeing all of this chaos in Texas, in Austin, surrounding them, trying to escape. It is like shot for shot, the burning building, everything directly pulled from the video game, except in the video game that a truck crashes into them, causing them to crash their own truck. They have a near car accident, which everyone I'm sure watching that played the video game was like, oh no, this is it.
Yeah.
And no, they're like, we got HBO's budget. You don't even know. Okay. We're not going to crash a truck, you silly gooses. We're going to crash a plane.
So good. What is it with big budget TV shows starting with a plane crash?
All good things start with a plane crash. Lost, Yellow Jackets, The Last of Us. Come on.
It's so good. The chaos of everything, like the brutality of it as well. Like Joel telling them to skip over the family, kind of suggesting to Tommy that he just mow through people to get through. And then the brutality of this plane crashing and an engine flying through it and smashing into their car. Everything is dialed up. And it's just so visceral. I was so worried that they would mess this up. So worried, because there's something about when you're playing this through in the game where you are as Sarah in the car, and then up until the crash, you're kind of like you're restricted in just being able to kind of view like see kind of like in any direction from her perspective. And then after that, after the crash, you're there as Joel carrying her through this chaos. And I don't think I've ever been more scared at the opening of a game than I was when I was carrying my kind of theoretical daughter through this kind of like chaotic landscape. And they captured it perfectly, I thought.
I totally agree. And I love that we also immediately see the dichotomy between Joel and Tommy. I'm not someone who normally watches shows with closed captioning on, unless I'm going to podcast about them. For this exact reason, I feel like I picked up some dialogue that maybe I hadn't heard before because it was either too low or there was something else happening. But it really sets up the differences between Joel and Tommy when they are passing that family. And immediately Joel is like, "We're not stopping." And Tommy says, "But they have a kid." And he says,
Hmm.
"So do we."
We.
Like, it is it is so obvious from the get that Joel is of a more self-interested mindset than Tommy. Tommy wants to help, at least somewhat, right? He hasn't yet been hardened by this new world. I just love it. It just sets things up so well for who Joel and Tommy are as people.
Hmm. Completely. Tommy is the hopeful, just wants to see the better in people, and Joel is hardened, but also will fiercely protect. He protect is what we get.
Mhm.
Um, and then we get to probably the most brutal scene of perhaps the series, as Sarah takes a bullet, and Joel sadly has to reconcile the fact that his daughter is now dead. This
Yeah.
is probably one of the most intense scenes that we'll get in the season. That's not to say that there won't be similar ones, but this scene is brutal, and very, very similar and different to the game in the kind of same respect. So, it originally when filming the game, Troy Baker, who plays Joel in both voice acting, but also kind of like the physical one with the morph suits and the dots and things, they had a first run at this, and they recorded take after take after take, and it was exhausting for them. And Troy was giving it his all, and by his own admission, was proper hamming it up and like, performance of a lifetime. I'm going to show them how good of an actor I'm going to be. And then they reshot it later on, quite ominously. And Neil Druckmann, the director, kind of had to explain. It was like, you've got to process the fact that it's like you're begging for her not to die. This isn't a kind of overblown exclamation of just "No world, why?" You're pleading for her not to die and to not go away. And I thought the video game performance is, I mean, when you played it through, you're not much of a crier. Did it get you at all?
I didn't cry, but I was really upset. I think because it's not an easy death, it's not a quick death, and it's not a
No.
painless death. Like, they are sitting over her, and Joel is just, "You're okay. No, you're okay." And he keeps calling her baby. I know it hurts. Like, it's, "Come on, you got to get up." Like, he's begging her to be
Mhm.
okay. And it's that look from Tommy that he knows there's nothing they can do, that this is the end, that, like, no matter how much Joel begs, he won't be able to save Sarah. It is so brutal. And of course, like, in the show, the actor playing Sarah knocks it out of the park. Like, the fear, the panic in her voice, in her eyes, in her movements, it's so brutal. And I don't know if there's anything to the fact that, like, I'm sure Joel has suffered loss, right? Like, everyone has in their life, especially by age 36, you usually have, like, experienced some sort of loss. Um, but it's the first loss in this new
Mhm.
world that I think is what makes it that much more of a gut punch, that, like, there's already so much bad happening, to then lose your daughter, and not to the cordyceps, not to this massive infection that's breaking out, but to another human being that shot her when she was fine, right? That's so much more intense and painful when they were so close in their minds to getting out of town, to being free and away from all of that. It is so supremely brutal. And I think, like, both the video game and the show do, like, a really, really good job at this scene. Obviously, the show pulling pretty much exactly, I don't know, do you know, like, dialogue-wise, it sounded very, very similar to me. I'm not sure exactly how many changes they make here.
Fairly similar. There's like certainly changes, slightly kind of different approach. I feel like TV Joel is a little bit more vocal with like kind of articulating that kind of like pleading and pray and almost like going through the stages of grief in kind of like it's not kind of really kind of segmented and you don't really see the jump between them and stuff, but I think you see this like slow processing of just panic, pleading, grieving, like all in this one bit. But yeah, I think they're incredibly similar, but it's just seeing in the way in which the two of them I think physically kind of acted out as well. Like there's certain ways in which kind of like Pedro Pascal kind of like grips Nico Parker and like holds her really close, like after he knows that she's gone, and just like almost like presses her into him because he's like, I can't lose this. Whereas Troy seems to be more like cradling, um, just some sublime choices from the pair of them. And it's another testament to why you adapt like video games into other pieces of media because you get a second crack at kind of just interpreting it a little bit, but you get subtle differences. Like you can have a really faithful adaptation, but still there's always going to be the subtlety of difference of someone else taking on that role. This is why theater is so great when you get people playing different roles over a kind of a long run, is you get to see just how much of a different take they give to it. And so deeply appreciative of it. Perhaps not in the moment. I mean, I cried at the game, cried at the TV show. I'm a crier. I always will be. That got me. That got me hard so badly.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I mean, we'll talk about it. I don't have Twitch streams of myself streaming the first game, so I don't have evidence of anything. I don't believe I cried here. I was upset and I was shocked because again, I thought I was going to be playing as Sarah for a lot longer. But I don't believe I cried. But then again, I'm not a big crier at media. I've said this before. It's just not something I generally do. So
It's interesting though because I think a lot of people when the game first came out, a lot of people thought that Sarah was Ellie, and that the girl on the cover just looked a little different in the game, or maybe there was like a time jump and maybe she looked like a little bit different that way. And so I think the death took a lot of people by surprise as well. Like it really blindsided them. And again, it's a testament to Naughty Dog and some commitments to really good storytelling in terms of like willing to take that risk, because to have someone you play as immediately who you would automatically assume to be the main character suddenly die. I mean, you know how visceral the reactions can be from video game players? That's a choice.
yeah, it's almost like when Scream was like, let's take Drew Barrymore. We're going to market the hell out of her. Boom, dead. Sorry for anyone who hasn't seen Scream. I feel like that's a well-established piece of media that I can talk about. But yeah, it does give the same vibe of like, it's a choice and it's a bold choice. And I will always appreciate a bold choice made by a TV show, video game, whatever.
Oxy?
Hydro.
How old?
3 months.
From Atlanta?
I don't know where he gets them from. I just know they're real.
It's real. It's from Atlanta. Fed got a factory down there in the QZ. Supposedly only makes 2 things. Pills and bullets. Bullets and pills.
Well, the more you shoot people, the harder it is to sleep, I guess.
Oh, you guess?
The episode jumps forward 20 years later, and we're open to this new harsh reality as we see life both outside and inside the QZ, the quarantine zone of Boston, which is under federal control. I thought that opening with this scene of the kid walking towards, when I first watched it, was a little bit odd because it really I didn't know what to expect. Like this is a completely fabricated scene, and seeing a kid kind of like stumble up to the QZ, I was like, what the heck is going on here? And you see why they're doing it, because it's a departure from having to show the brutality within the QZ of them just openly shooting people that scan for a positive infection. Instead, no, they're just gonna, kill a kid. Lovely stuff.
It's a little bit a nicer way of doing it, like promising they'll get him his favorite toys and then just kind of, slyly injecting him with the thing that will ultimately kill him. I think the other thing it offers us is a catch up on who Joel now is. 20 years later, right? We get to the point where he is now working. He's doing like a ton of different side jobs, and one of them is burning the bodies of the infected. And we see the little boy's body. It's one of the bodies he has to dispose of. The woman he's working with can't do it. She says, "I'm sorry, I can't do this."
Mhm.
He has witnessed the death of his own child 20 years ago, and yet he picks up the body and he dumps it in the fire. Like, he continues on with his job. So I agree. I think it's a little bit more world building, right? Which is why we include that sort of scene. But it also kind of gives you a little bit of an inkling of Joel is probably a little bit more hardened now than
Yeah.
he was 20 years ago.
Yeah, this was a conscious choice by Craig and Neil when they were discussing it on their own kind of podcast, where they were saying that they needed a way of introducing the scanners. They need to do it in a way that people would recognize them up close as well, because obviously you kind of want to know what a kind of red or a green light is and kind of what that entails. And also to show the difference of Joel, like you've perfectly kind of summarized, is that like previously Joel was protecting his little baby girl, and yet now he's just able to, because of the barriers that are up, because of how hardened he is, he can take the kind of body of a child and toss it in the fire and not feel anything, which is, I think, the worst. It's that numb look that he gives when he throws them in, as if it's just work. And then even later on, he's asking like for just more work, like it's just business. Well, it's not business for him; it's survival. He's doing it for a reason. But in that moment, it's like, crikey, that's such a different person than what we saw not moments ago.
Yeah. It's compartmentalizing to be able to get money, supplies, things that he needs to find his brother, who is now missing, or at least to Joel, right? Joel has not been able to make contact with him in
Yeah.
3 weeks, which is very unusual. Usually it is less than a day. Tommy is replying to his messages. And not only that, but I feel like we're also getting an inkling that not that Joel is a big deal, but more like he has connections. Like he's got the in. He's selling drugs to a Fedra officer, which is a big deal. He has this connection to the radio operator where he's able to just skip this massive line. So maybe he's not like president or anything, but he's at least a known commodity in the Boston QZ.
Yeah, he seems to be a man that's like got the connections, knows how to get to the right things to the right people to get what he needs out of this world. He's adapted incredibly well, both by being hardened by the kind of harsh realities of it, but also kind of the practicalities of it, like how you do earn the most amount of rations, how you do get cigarettes to a radio operator, and how you kind of do manage to get the contacts to get a battery together. It's it's kind of great because in the game we hear that Joel was a bit of a smuggler, but it's great to set these small little clues up and to explain why it becomes apparent that Joel probably is a good idea to smuggle Ellie out of the place because he's set up. I mean, he is a smuggler, admittedly by his own admission later on, not like a people smuggler, but I mean, he knows how to get in, he knows how to get out, and he knows how to find things to like supplies, which is exactly what's needed. I thought the whole thing with him dealing was a great choice as well, because of course the as the soldiers kind of said, I mean, find it hard to sleep after being like shooting people. That was rough, and the whole like, "Oh, you
Mm.
guess" kind of thing was such a great dialogue choice because it's almost like incredulous of just, of course, it's difficult to sleep after you've been shooting people, but there's also a thing of, "Oh, you guess," as if you don't experience this as well because you're just like me. So,
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, I mean, later in the episode, we're going to see Joel drinking, taking a pill himself, right? Like, it's obvious that he has his own coping mechanisms as well. But I also love the bit of world building we get here of, as someone who lives in the United States, it is a large country. It is not easy to get from one side to the other. It is, in fact, a very long, difficult journey. And that's before you add in a global pandemic and the fact that you probably can't drive most of the way. So when he's talking
Mhm.
about, oh, yeah, these pills are from Atlanta, maybe Atlanta to Boston now, today, in the world I'm living in, is not a difficult journey. But in this world, it is. And so to hear things like, oh, yeah, the pills have been smuggled from Atlanta. They have like some sort of, they made pills and pills and bullets is what they make down there. And then to hear that Tommy is in Wyoming. Like, Boston to Wyoming is clear across the country. It is not close and
Mhm.
it won't be an easy journey, as the radio operator kindly laid out for Joel.
Yeah. And again, a great choice, a departure from the game again, the introduction of the kind of radios and the how they would probably communicate. I think it makes total sense for this world because in lieu of obviously internet's like satellite service and things, people would still be able to probably get radios working with the use of like solar energy or kind of like whatever kind of energy they can provide to these radios. But radio waves themselves, easy to hijack and to kind of communicate over. So certainly a great way of doing it. I love the fact that there is a queue for this one singular service. Like it's one thing to have a shortwave radio, but to be able to obviously communicate to Wyoming, they must be going through other like relays because of the size of America, surely. But the world building is kind of fleshed out more by the small amounts of information that he gives to Joel in the warnings of just like there are slavers out there. I've heard the worst things beyond the walls of like RQZ. Like it is, if you think it's harsh in here, 10 times worse out there. And not only that, there are the infected out there as well. Like you're not just dealing with like the brutalism of humans out like within here. You've got to deal with the infection out there as well, which
Yeah.
harsh.
Yeah. You're the expert, so I want to defer to you in case you know a number of years that we're looking at, right? So we go 20 years. We're jumping into the future between Joel being in Texas and Sarah dying on Outbreak Day to him being in Boston. Do we know how long he has been in the Boston QZ at this point? Like how long he's settled there since being in Texas?
I don't think we get a definitive answer on it, but I think the idea is because of how embedded he is in terms of like the smuggling at the very least. It's
Mm-hmm.
been quite a while.
Okay.
Certainly, Tommy had enough time to be embedded with the Fireflies, which we kind of learned later in this episode with a throwaway comment by by Joel to Marlene. But and also he's had time to develop a relationship with Tess, and I'm not sure. Like I know that it certainly isn't the first place they've been to. They've been all over,
Right.
and Boston's somewhere that's settled. I'll have to double check that. But yeah, I get the sense that there's been a few, like maybe 5 years or so.
That's kind of the vibe I got as well. Obviously,
Yeah,
trekking from Texas to Boston would take a
yeah.
minute. And that's not encountering anything. That's just straight A to B. You have to imagine they did encounter quite a few things. From my knowledge, I think he met Tess on the road from Texas to Boston.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was just curious because it does feel like he's very much embedded in the society of the Boston QZ. Obviously, he's a smuggler, so he does leave occasionally. But yeah, it's really interesting.
You gonna keep me here? Kill me?
Tess, come on.
Then Robert, what do you want?
I want you to forget this ever happened.
Done.
Don't do that.
What? It's just a truck battery. I paid you for it, you sold it to someone else, and you spend my money. I mean, you think I've never done shit like that?
My guys fucked you up.
Yeah, so discipline them. You cut off her finger or whatever the fuck you want. I don't care, they're your fucking guys.
Not only is the world kind of fleshed out, but also we learn of the battery deal and the situation with both Tess and the Fireflies. I, for one, think that Tess in this portrayal is incredible. Anatov is so good at playing just this badass who does not take any shit. But it's so funny that we kind of first meet her and you think that she's the one doing the interrogating when actually she's the prisoner. Just a phenomenal choice, I thought.
I think she's probably one of the characters for me that my appreciation for her grows from game to screen. I think Tess on the show is more compelling than game Tess, and probably in large part due to Anna Torv's portrayal of her. I also love that they make the relationship between Joel and Tess much more explicit in the show. It's very
Mhm.
obvious that they're together, that they work together, that there is a lot of trust between the two of them. And yeah, the fact that she just it's she just rolls into bed with Joel like she didn't just get interrogated, beaten, and then arrested and spent the day in jail. Like it's all in a day's work. It's wild, but it just shows not only the world they're living in, but just the fact that this is kind of just part of her everyday life and how normal it
Mhm.
is for them is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. And I love the fact that they also show the intimacy between them as just being like normal. I think a lesser show would have had some sort of like love scene here. Like she'd have come back, like, it would have been like kind of hokey and tropey. But I
That's not who
think
they
it
are. Yeah.
no, and it's also like you can have an intimate relationship with someone that isn't carnal in nature. It can just be affectionate. It can just be companionship, which I think is probably the thing that they're probably craving most in this world. Is that kind of uncomplicatedness of just someone who you can always rely on, which I think would be kind of make most sense and be most good. And again, I think it speaks to Tess's nature of just like the conversation will wait until tomorrow. I need my sleep right now. If I wake him, it will be a big thing. I'm just gonna sleep. He
Mhm.
won't know anything. Joel, of course, hits the roof, goes full, like kind of, oh, tough man. I'm gonna go like deal with them. And she's like, no, 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 no. Take it down a bit. I need you to hold off, not get mad, but we need to do a reaction to this. We're not just
Mhm.
going to take this lying down, which I thought was again great and a great way of also establishing that Joel answers to Tess. Like it's like she like it backs up what she said to Robert. Robert, by the way, complete piece of shit in the game, complete piece of shit in the TV show. Equal on both parts. I'm not going to say any kind of difference there. But the explosion and the like interrupting that interrogation made total sense because it also introduces the Fireflies.
Kim,
Marlene?
we are in a war against a military dictatorship to restore democracy and freedom. Does that sound about right?
Yes?
Are we winning? Are we beating Fedra here? Are the Fireflies beating Fedra anywhere?
Rebellion takes time.
If you fight for 20 years and you get nowhere, you're not a rebellion. Just spray paint.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times we have, okay, here's the government, here's the organization that we all hate. And here are the band of misfits, the revolutionaries on the other side of things trying to fix things, which in this case would be the Fireflies. But you
Mhm.
have Joel and Tess kind of interestingly positioned where they're not part of either of those things. They're not Fedra, and they're certainly not the Fireflies. And so it's this conflict of interest where Joel needs the battery to find Tommy. So they need to figure out who the hell did Robert sell this battery to? It was supposed to be ours. We find out it's the Fireflies, who's this like rebel group fighting against Fedra, right? And we're introduced to Marlene, who is like an incredibly complex and interesting character. And I just enjoy how the show, it's not as simple as A versus B or black and white. It's no, there's everyone has their own interests in mind and they conflict with each other constantly. So while maybe we are theoretically rooting for Joel and Tess and the Fireflies, they're not always going to be working in concert with each other.
Oh yeah, completely. I loved it when Joel was given the approach earlier as well, like just before the dealing scene, and it's just like, yeah. So I don't want anything from you, but if you're feeling lost, he's like, if you tell me to look for the light, I'll break your jaw. Like it's just brilliant.
It is because it's like anything where you're getting, it's almost like a door-to-door like religious person, right? Of like, have
Hmm.
you heard of my friend Jesus Christ? Like, let me
Yeah.
tell you about this book. It gives that, even though they probably do have some like good ideas, But to Marlene's point later, it's like, well, it's just a bunch of graffiti after 20 years. Like, what
Mhm.
actually have we done? So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And you need someone like Marlene to head things up. You need someone that is going to be that kind of officious, authoritarian ruler who is going to treat it like an army, because otherwise it will just be a bunch of misfits spray painting and regurgitating this kind of like hopeful line. That's not a revolution. That's not how rebellions work. Like all rebellions are militaristic in nature, so you have to treat it like a military function. And so
Mhm.
when she expresses her frustrations of just follow fucking orders, I so happy with that choice, because
Yeah,
you know that you'd get questions left and right about what are we doing? Why am I not
sure.
privy to this information? No, respect the hierarchy.
You're on a
Follow
need to
fucking
know
orders.
basis. Yeah. And
Exactly.
this information, right? Information is power. It's still true in this world even. And the fact that Ellie is immune has to be kept quiet. You can't,
Mhm.
we have a girl who is immune to the infection. So any anybody that finds out that information, she is dangerous no matter how you slice it. Either people are not going to believe you and try to kill her because she is testing positive for the cordyceps infection, or they're going to want her because they see her as valuable. So it is really important that people don't find out this information. And Marlene being the key to all of that is fascinating for reasons that we'll probably not get into in this podcast necessarily. But I think it's incredible how they set up the character of Marlene, and I love that she is played by the same person that voices her in the video game. It is like, this is why this adaptation in particular is so beautiful, because of things like this, where it is
Mhm.
the exact same person who knows this character because she's already played her once before.
Yeah. To bring that kind of love for a character that you kind of admire and has played before, and be able to kind of rekindle it and just take it on in a different form. Again, it's not the same performance. It's not just voice actor that happens to have a body this time. It's like, no, this feels different. Like, she feels to me tougher in the TV show
Lived
than
in.
she does. Yeah. And I think that it also brings kind of the practicality of the politicking of it all to this, with how I think the dialogue supports it a little bit better on that, because there's a kind of almost an element of her kind of not only tactically saying, well, we're hitting them here, here, and here, but we're here. Here's why we're all going to leave the QZ and stuff like that. She talks about Ellie almost like an asset as well, much in the way that that Fedra would treat her like an asset.
Yeah, she's
And the
cargo.
reason, yeah, because they are they will treat her both the same way. Maybe Fedra might kind of reactively shoot her or something like that because she's infected. Maybe they won't give this kind of plot point a a go, and maybe Marlene is a bit more optimistic with what is available to them here, but both of them are going to effectively do the same thing in essence, but she's going to use it in a different way because of her politics, and that she wants freedom and she wants to be out of Fedra's control. I thought that was just it's a little bit of nuance that was added to it, and it's a level of detail and world building that Craig Mazin brought to it. Apparently, when he kind of was doing the kind of what they called the show Bible with Neil Druckmann beforehand, of kind of just doing a broad outline, he was asking question after question about the Fireflies, to the point where he was like, "Okay, well, where do they gather? What do they meet? How do they find new people?" And it's these things that every fan has questioned and thought of, but he gets the answers. He gets to ask the actual creator of it. Gets them. I'm jealous. I'm so jealous. But he tells us.
Yeah, exactly. And we finally get to meet Ellie. And okay, obviously Bella Ramsey, icon, legend, absolutely incredible. I feel like Bella Ramsey embodies Ellie immediately and perfectly. She is not someone who's going to take orders without questioning them. And she's just immediately so defiant. I love her attitude, her spiciness when they ask her to count, and the 8, 9, fuck you. Like it's like so good. Yeah, I love it. I love it so much, and she doesn't know why she's been taken. She just knows that she has been and she wants out. She doesn't want to deal with these people anymore. And I love this portrayal of Ellie. I think it's perfect. And I love the conversation between her and Marlene, and kind of like
Mhm.
the first inkling that we get that like Marlene is actually quite kind to Ellie, unlike
Yes.
everyone else who's interacting with her.
Mhm. But you also get an answer to a question of just, well, why didn't the Fireflies shoot on sight when they knew that she was sick? And you get the answer in the fact that Marlene was the one that dropped her off at Fedra the whole time. What that means, we'll come to. But for now, it's a huge question of just like, well, what is the history between these two? I loved the way in which Ellie just goes, "Are you my fucking mom?" And she's like, "Do I look like your mom?"
So
It's just,
perfect.
but it is just like, of course, that would be the question. Like, how do you know so much about me?
Mhm.
Again, corroborated with the fact that she knew her real name,
Like, she calls herself
Veronica.
Veronica to everyone else. Yeah.
What choice of a fake name? If you
What,
had
you
to
don't think
choose a
Veronica's
fake,
a good fake name?
sorry to any Veronicas listening, but like
So
that wouldn't be my
rude.
first choice of a fake name.
What would be your first choice of a fake name?
Oh,
Do you
don't
have
say
one?
that. I just got. I could. I'm on the spot now. I can't think of one. Joel. I'll just go with Joel.
Go with Joel. Yeah. I'd honestly probably go with something that would also fit my like age and appearance. So I'd probably, instead of picking the name like Jessica, which was super common in the early 90s, I'd probably just go with like Ashley or Brittany, because that's believable.
Yeah.
And there's a bazillion of them. Done.
But they developed this kind of like almost caring relationship. They showed a more tender side of Marlene, which is absolutely essential because other than that, she's just been quite a sassy, like kind of authoritarian ruler. And it's just like, well, why would I root for them over Fedra? They're just one and the same. Yeah, okay, one's downtrodden, the other one's kind of winning in this weird war, but also they're a disorganized mess by the sounds of it. But there's a plan. They're taking her and they're shifting out of the QZ. Yeah, something goes wrong though. Robert, the piece of shit, sells them the car battery that's a dud, and he's not only sold it to Joel and Tess, but he sold it to the Fireflies as well. Greedy little shit.
Yep. And the biggest problem of all is that during that entire exchange and during the, retribution, Marlene and her like assistant woman were pretty injured. Tess has been, excuse me, not Tess. Marlene has been shot in the side and like right in the gut, which gut wounds feel like just bad news all around. There are a lot of organs
Yeah.
floating around in there. And
But
this
in
other
TV
woman lost
land,
her
they're
whole ass
fine.
ear.
Yeah.
Just complete. She's like, you don't have a. What does she say? You don't have an ear on your fucking head. Like,
Yeah.
get outta here.
And brutal. I know, obviously noticed the bleeding beforehand, but then there's a shot afterwards, and yeah, fully like Mike
Just
Tysoned off,
gone.
like just gone.
Yeah.
Oh
So they can't possibly smuggle Ellie out, and
no.
so this is when okay. Well, Tess and Joel are trying to leave anyway, and they want something. Well, we'll do it for you, but you got to bring Ellie out of the QC.
Yeah. Really great way in which everything kind of comes together. In the game, it does feel a little hokey. Like you kill Robert because of the betrayal involved, and then you just happen to meet Marlene afterwards. Whereas with this, everything feels like it comes together just a little bit cleaner, a little bit kind of more
Mhm.
just coincidence, but just a good coincidence in that way. We also get a great build of the history between Tommy and his involvement with the Fireflies and the way that Joel thinks of them as brainwashing him effectively with this mumbo jumbo look for the light stuff of just Tommy being the hopeful that he is and Joel being like, no, don't pay attention to that hogwash. You got to be tough in this world. And so he harbors resentment. So again, you've got that kind of, well, they're not going to be siding with the Fireflies. There's resentment there. And it's not just because they're smugglers and operating away from Fedra and away from the Fireflies. No, he is averse to working with them, which I thought was really a really clever way of introducing that.
I agree. And I think having the setup be that he has to take a teenage girl also. I can't imagine Joel has been hanging out with many teens kids since everything happened on Outbreak Day. So I can't imagine he exactly is going to be like, yeah, sure. Let me just trek this kid off wherever you want them put. Like, oh, she must be related to someone important if that's why I'm smuggling her out of here. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of clashing happening that makes it just that much more interesting. A lot of conflict of interests happening.
Yeah. I love the fact that when they first encounter each other, Ellie takes a blade to him. Brilliant. And Joel points a gun at her. Just what a way to show the conflict immediately, but also to kind of like set the dynamic of like, well, Ellie is this kind of um, like like kind of impulsive kid that's just going to take an opportunity and it's going to be reckless, whereas Joel is the formidable one who knows how to react to this kind of stuff. It was a great way of establishing that dynamic immediately, and Tess being the one to overcome his reservations and just be like, we could deal with this. It's going to be a minor thing, but we'll get it and then we'll move on with our lives. So they've got a plan in place. They know what they're going to be doing, and so it's time to get out of the QZ. So Tess and Joel agree to do it. They wait until the cover of darkness and they kind of start sneaking out. During the game, this was intense because you're going through all these pipes, you've got spotlights here and there, and you've got to hide away from things. And the worst part is when they do spot you and start shooting at you, you can't shoot back, so all your choice is to run.
It's
I hate
bullshit.
it.
It's bullshit. Bullshit. Listen, I have said this so many times while playing the video game The Last of Us. I will fight infecteds all day long. Don't make me fight the police, okay? You want to know why? They have helmets, and so you can't get a clear headshot on them ever. They are the worst. This, I remember playing this particular part of the video game over and over and over because there's so many cops everywhere, and it is the worst. Tess and Joel and Ellie have a little bit of an easier time, I would argue, than I had because, Joel doesn't die half a dozen times in his scenes. So,
Yeah. I mean, also, they pick up an assault rifle, which, spoilers for the game, you don't get until the very fucking end. They get it in episode 1. What the heck is going on here? I was livid.
He's playing on easy mode. That's what he's doing.
Exactly. It should be on grounded. It should be really tough. But I thought, great to kind of expedite this. Obviously, it's good to get a good action scene in, but really, what does that add? We know that they're getting out of the QZ, and it shouldn't be difficult for them because they're smugglers. So I thought it was a great way of just having one soldier happen to see them, the one that had warned Joel not to leave the QZ tonight of all nights because of something that was going down, and he's the one to capture him. So of course there is the resentment. There's the fact that he's obviously been made to pay over and above what the Oxy is probably worth because Joel is desperate, needing money and wants to get out, doesn't care about the future relationship. So he gets do things by the book and to scan them. And this is where we get the confirmation or the first inkling that Ellie is infected.
No, I'm not sick.
No!
I am not sick.
No!
I'm not sick. Look. This is 3 weeks old. Nobody lasts more than a day. Just look at the old to you.
Yeah. Ellie stabs the guy, which is, again, very Ellie and very funny. And Joel, while kind of standing to defend her, as is, I think, just his instinct, right? His gut instinct. And he I mean, the show, I don't even think the show necessarily needed to do this, but they give us the flashback to the scene
Yeah.
with the soldier with the flashlight and the gun on Sarah. And of course, Joel is transported back to that moment, loses it, and just beats the shit out of this soldier. Bare hands, just not a gun or anything, just boom, takes him down and kills him. And I don't think we needed the little flashback moment. I'm not mad at it, but I do think it was a little unnecessary. I think the viewers are smart enough to kind of put two and two together. But I also agree. I like that it's the soldier he already had met with, because I do think if there's any sort of like disbelief of like, how was Joel able to get one over on the soldier? It's like, well, he knows the guy, like
Mhm.
the guy's going to take a beat before he instinctively kills all three of them because he knows Joel. And that's that half a second that Joel needs to tackle this guy and kill him. And yeah, it's during this entire confrontation, where Joel is beating in this Fedra soldier's head, you hear Ellie saying to Tess, "No, this is 3 weeks old. Look, you can tell. This doesn't look like it was yesterday's, does it?" Like, that's all the time she needs to be able to get Tess and Joel to at least take a beat before they kill her.
Mhm. Well, this is the thing. I completely agree on the whole flashback. I thought in the moment it was kind of unnecessary. I thought maybe if they wanted to do that, because I mean it had been a long episode, and originally this wasn't meant to be one episode. It was meant to be divided up into 2 episodes. But the network execs at HBO thought that ending with Joel chucking a kid in the fire after having witnessed his daughter die might be a bit too brutal for a season opener. Maybe they need to give a reason to kind of like continue watching. Probably one of the few times I'll praise network executives for making a really good choice over show creators, but even by the show creators' admission, it was a very excellent recommendation by them. But I think that it could have been done if they had to do it in a more elegant way. Like it could have been just maybe the same um like sound from the soldier originally was just kind of played over the audio of what was happening here, of like showing Joel kind of manifesting that PTSD moment, or maybe for like a brief moment in the flash, you see that old soldier's kind of like visage, and
Yes.
then flash to it like the other one or something like that.
There are more subtle
So that
ways for sure.
yeah, if it had to be included at all, I think they could have got away with not doing it.
Same.
But I don't think it ruins it dramatically. And the way in which he kind of rushes him, I'm sorry, but like this guy isn't portrayed as being the best soldier. He's probably like a little bit high on oxy.
He's taking a piss on the wall, like not, you know what I mean? I'm just saying, like this guy could easily be bum rushed.
Yeah, exactly. And so when Joel starts like smashing and doing, admittedly, Craig Mason talks about this a lot about Ellie's fascination with violence. He really seems to think that, like, believe that this is one of the bigger themes of the show, and it really is because the whole show is about the primal nature of love and how that is like how love isn't always this wonderful thing. Sometimes it can be brutal in the worst ways, and this is exactly it. Joel is taken back with post-traumatic stress disorder because of love. And in that moment, it is taken back to it, and the brutality comes out because of his need to protect. That's from a loving instinct. He may not have love for Ellie, but it's the instinct, it's that primal nature that comes out. But Ellie is activated by the violence, and to the point where there's a great kind of spread. If you think about kind of Sarah he when he like smacks the neighbor and she's like horrified by it. Ellie's like leaning in, like kind of getting close. She seems to be intrigued by it because she's just been brought up in a different world. And so it has to be kind of shown that way. And it makes total sense. And when the scan comes through, and of course, they do the whole reveal and things, I thought it was so much more visceral than the game in this one. It's something that I really kind of felt better with the way like kind of Tess is fearful. She's like, Joel, as if this is monumental, as if they could die at any moment themselves, which was a great departure from the game, which was just a little bit like not that it wasn't a big deal, but it just didn't seem as immediate. It didn't seem as urgent.
It's immediately, like, emotionally fraught to know, like, okay, we're now smuggling someone who has tested positive for the thing that is killed a ton of the world, right? Like, that should be a massive emotional impact, and I feel like the show does a really great job with it. Um, I also agree about Ellie's fascination with violence, and I do think there's, like, a secondary reading, not to take away from, you know, the way Ellie views violence and her growing up in the world that she's in, but also just this. I don't know that she's had a lot of protectors in her life, you know? She's an orphan, she doesn't have parents, and sure, Marlene, maybe you could consider a protector, but also Marlene was very quick to be like, "Okay, Tess and Joel, now you take this piece of cargo and get her out of the city," right? Like,
Mhm.
she doesn't have that person in her life. So I think we could view it both ways of, okay, she is interested, she's intrigued by Joel beating the crap out of this Fedra soldier, but also, I think she's like, "Wow, someone's sticking up for me," you know? I
Yeah.
think there's, like, a bit of that too, and I think this is kind of the not a I don't wanna say turning point because it's not. I think it's kind of a stepping stone is maybe the way I would put it. Like, if you're gonna talk in, like, inside out terms, not like a core memory. Like, this is a moment, you know, where it's not just she sees Joel break and just how vicious and violent he can be and how it shows how he has survived in this world for so long,
Mhm.
but also this guy stuck up for me. And that's
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be a big deal for someone like Ellie who just simply does not have that in her life.
Yeah. Huge moments. And then we get the kind of the working decision to just kind of, well, okay, we'll get to calmer waters and we'll evaluate it then. So let's just trek on. And we end with the final shot of them running into the chaos, or heading into the chaos, as Never Let Me Down again by Depeche Mode plays out, as the radio shows a song from the 80s, in that somewhere there is some bad stuff going down, and then we cut to credits. Amazing. I loved it so much. It's such a good choice.
It's incredible because Ellie broke the code earlier in the episode. We know 80s songs mean bad things ahead. And I kind of love when shows have like a grittier visual moment and they have, like, a very lighthearted, like, beboppy song happening in the background, right? There's something about the contrast that always makes me happy, and so, yeah, this is a great choice. Like, it is signaling that not great things ahead, man. Like, this world looks scary, and it is.
Mhm.
So, it's an absolutely incredible choice.
The contrast as well, like the kind of the rather upbeat feel to the song, but the sinister nature of it being like about a guy talking about taking drugs, and then just the
Mhm.
whole taking a ride with my best friend. And it's like, oh, maybe Joel and Ellie might become friends. Who knows? We'll see how that goes. I mean, we've seen the posters. It's likely, right? But uh, how do we feel about the episode as a whole, though? Because obviously it's a slog. It's the longest episode of the season. Was originally meant to be two, obviously condensed into one. How did you feel as a season premiere? Like ordinarily they tend to be quite strong. I thought this was really good.
I think it has a lot to do, and it does it extremely well. Like,
Mhm.
it's a lot of information, it's a lot of characters, it's a lot of world building that they are tasked with setting up. And let's face it, they have a lot of time because it's a longer episode, but I thought it was really good. Like, I don't know, again, we nitpicked like the tiniest of things, but I don't know what else they could have done to set us on this path. I also agree with you. This feels like the stopping point after episode 1. I think this is a better stopping point because
Mhm.
we've introduced all the like, essential characters that we needed to, and we're on the road. I like that. I like that we're hitting the road episode 1. So it's an extremely strong pilot.
Yeah. I don't think anyone was really hankering to settle in and kind of explore Boston a little bit more in as well. That's no slight against Boston for anyone
I've
listening.
been there, you know, whatever.
But I mean, it doesn't seem to be a place that you really want to savor and enjoy. It's horrible, and so it's quite nice to kind of get out into the world. And I'm sure things are going to be peachy from here on out, right? Sure,
Yeah.
it'd be much
So-
nicer now we're out of Boston.
Super easy. Yeah. Don't have to deal with Fedra. You know.
Brilliant. So that's our episode. Obviously, for those who have been listening and kind of want to avoid spoilers, now's the time to head off out because we'll be covering the spoilers for the season ahead, for the season coming, and also the games in full now. So if you're heading off, subscribe, do all those lovely things. Subscribing really would help us at this point. We're starting this out, getting things going and rolling. So look for us everywhere. Look for the Light Pod. And also, if you want to send in feedback, if you want to get in touch, look for the Light Podcast at gmail.com. Jess and I have been podcasting quite some time now, and feedback is probably our favorite part to kind of go and kind of read on the show and get to discuss. Also, if we've missed something that you think that is awful that we didn't cover, let us know. So yeah, find us on socials. But for those of you who want to listen to spoilers, we're going to jump into those now. Okay. Casuals have gone. We can talk spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's so much setup. The carbs, the where Tommy is, for crying out loud. What is going on with Ellie? Bill and Frank?
Bill and Frank being set up. This was one of those things that I was saying, like the subtitles, the captions was nice because when Ellie is poking around Joel's apartment, obviously she brings it up later, but like you overhear them talking about Bill and Frank, and I was like, oh my god, Bill and Frank already. Episode 1. I love it so much.
Yeah, there's so much that is kind of teed up, which is phenomenal. I can't get over the Bill and Frank of it because obviously it's such a huge episode, and I'm looking forward to talking about that episode in particular because it's a doozy. But to know that they are setting not only the themes and things, but they're layering and doing the world building as well, is just chef's kiss. Chef's kiss, because it again is another touch of just what great quality. What great quality.
Yeah. Also the relationships, I feel like, right, with Tommy and Joel especially, I felt like you could see seeds of what's going to happen with kind of the destruction of their relationship later on, where Joel is the guy who will survive at all costs. He's brutal, but effective. And Tommy is a bit more squishy. Like he's a little bit more hopeful. He's a little bit more optimistic. And I think you can see that pretty much immediately, which was like so astonishing to me. They set it up so well.
Mm-hmm. I've when we've been talking about doing this, I've been so looking forward to, like, I will jump on any excuse to rewatch this season because I've lost count of how many times I've watched it. There was one time when it was first airing where in the lead up to like the season finale, I rewatched the entire season in one day, which was a terrible choice.
I don't know how that was okay for your mental health because like this show is so heavy.
It really wasn't that heavy. But I'm liking the fact that we are getting to kind of watch this and talk about spoilers because we get to talk about it through the lens of like knowing what's coming up and knowing what to expect. At this point, obviously, we didn't have any inkling that the second season was going to be a thing. It wasn't even greenlit while the first season was running. It took a while before we got that confirmation that season 2 was coming, and whether it would be the second game that's coming either. So, I'm to say that I'm excited for the second game is an understatement. I think it's my favorite game I've ever played. for those who know me and know that I'm not a massive gamer, but like the games that I do love, I tend to play relentlessly. I think The Last of Us 2 is the game I've played most in my entire life. I must have played it through like 20 plus times at the very least. Like
That's
in
wild to me. Yeah.
It's just, and it's not even because there's so much new to explore. Like once you've explored everything, you've done everything. But
Yeah.
it's just like you've got to experience it. And I think as well, it's a game that's got like mechanics that I absolutely adore as well. I think there's no game that feels fluid to play like that. I think everything like feels incredibly natural. But I don't know how they're gonna do a second game in a series. It's gonna be crazy.
I'm really, really excited for season 2. And yeah, it's just seeing the beginnings of all of these characters and how far they will go, right?
Mhm.
Seeing Joel and Ellie's first meeting and what their relationship eventually becomes.
Yeah.
Getting the importance of Tess and just like she is the catalyst for everything to come. She
Mhm.
is the reason they take Ellie. And knowing she's not going to live very long into the show. Like it's wild. It's and oh my god, the Marlene stuff, like
Yeah.
knowing her connection to Ellie. It's so interesting to rewatch those scenes between them, knowing what Marlene knows about Ellie that Ellie doesn't know Marlene knows, you know?
Mhm.
That Ellie doesn't
Yeah.
even know. Yeah.
The we until the show came out didn't know until it was like kind of given the prequel scene beforehand,
Yeah.
which was again crazy. We get Left Behind, which obviously gives us the Riley of it all, which
Mhm.
again I'm looking forward to getting into. Like as well, like when Riley's name gets dropped with the conversation with Marlene in this episode, after knowing it and experiencing it, like for game players, that was like a punch in the gut, like that. I think it hits more when you've watched the season and you go back and hear that again
Mhm.
because it's given so much more emotional, like kind of like emotionality to it because it's one thing to play it out and experience it and have the cutscenes where they wear the masks and get goofy and then throw the bricks into the car windows and lovely scenes like that. But there's something else about seeing it and also experiencing Riley's fears, which they explore in the TV show more of like, especially like seeing the horrificness of like what is going on with the Fireflies and getting her just to build bombs and stationing
Mhm.
her in like a shopping mall that does have infected in because they've got nowhere else to put her and she's not that it's not that bad if
Disposable.
they yeah,
Yeah.
she's disposable. That's the what I'm trying to say. Yeah. It's it's so great. And we get that just from a name drop.
Yep.
Oh, so good.
They set up everything. That's why I love this adaptation so much is because it works for both the uninitiated and the like hardcore fans. There's so many fun
Mhm.
Easter eggs. There's so many things they set up here that will inevitably pay off. Even the Ellie of it all, right? Like her kind of coming alive at the sight of Joel beating the Fedra officer and knowing
Yeah.
like the confrontations that she will get in after Joel is gone. Like knowing that scene that I hated playing through in game 2 where she will not stop with Abby. And it is like
Mhm.
you just have to stop. Like you have to let this go. It's the only way you're going to be able to move on. Uh I feel like it's even set up here. Just seeing her relationship to physical violence.
Yeah.
Is it's incredible. I'm so excited to get into all of it and knowing that we're just a few months out from season 2. It's gonna be so fun. It's gonna be so fun. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. So if anyone is listening along and looking at a kind of a calendar, you're probably thinking, "Oh, they're starting a little bit early." The hope is we get through season 1 and then we have a couple of weeks where we can fully dive into Last of Us Part 2, talk full game spoilers, what our expectations for season 2 are, how it's going to be changed, what we know from the trailers. We're going to probably dive into the trailers. I have
Yeah.
been relentless with those trailers, screen capping
Every
and
single frame.
theorizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you've
Every
got to
frame
do
get
it.
mapped out.
I'm trying to work out what's the situation. For anyone listening that is on my level, what's the situation with the horses? why are there 3 people on horses? It doesn't look like Joel, Tommy, and Abby. So who's that out riding? I need to know. The season
Mhm.
can't come soon enough. But yeah, so we've got that coming up. We're hoping, I think we are expecting it mid-April, isn't it? Late April?
That's because it's going to be basically The White Lotus will be on HBO, and it is airing directly after The White Lotus is over because we can only have one superstar Sunday night HBO
Yeah.
show at a time, which I appreciate because I like to space my stuff out a little bit. So yeah, we're looking at like probably the second week of April is when we expect to have season 2 coming out.
Second or third, I think.
Second or third, yeah, around that time.
One of the two. Yeah. But we're looking forward to it. And we're so glad that you're coming along on this journey with us.
Yes.
Jess, is there anything else you want to cover off?
I think that's it. I think we covered everything. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms and email us in any feedback you have. You could be full spoilers because we're fully spoiled. So
Yeah.
throw in some emails, any thoughts you have, anything we missed, anything you want to hear us discuss in the spoiler section specifically, if there are things you want us to chat about. But yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. So, before we wrap up, let me end with a little bit of levity. Why did the infected go to school?
I don't know why.
Because it wanted to brush up on its fungal mentals. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.